certified coactive coach and emotion code practitioner. Empty nesters are often trying to get rid of things, and often they have things that their kids don't want, like furniture and the china. But the thing that kids always love is the stories. And whether it's stories of when they were a kid or when their parents were kids, everyone seems to really enjoy those stories. So today I've invited Rusty LaHaye to join us. Rusty is a longtime creative writing instructor and editor who specializes in bringing an empathetic, heart centered approach to helping authors create and tweak their words, stories, and lessons in their voice to best serve the real boss, the audience, not the editor. Driven by a passion for memoir and passing on stories, Rusty believes if you've loved and breathed, you have a story. Someone is waiting for yours. So welcome, Rusty. Excited to have
Hi,
you.
hi, Cora. Wonderful to be here and to talk to empty nesters about writing because there's so much we can do with all of a sudden that big blocks of time that we might have when the kids all vacate.
Yeah, and I kind of think it might also be a nice way to kind of transition into the empty nester thing because it's fun to look back at memories. And
Mhm.
everybody loves hearing stories. It seems like kids never get tired of hearing stories about either about themselves, things that happened when they were little, or things that their parents did that maybe they didn't know about. So I think writing it out would be amazing. I know for myself, not necessarily a writer. My mom recently did her memoir about some stuff when she was young. So I'll look forward to some tips that you can share with us about getting started, especially if you think you're not necessarily a writer.
Okay, well, especially if you're like Cora and you want to shy away from the writing aspect, well, you can record your stories and do them in little sections and save them on a voice recording app. Or if people have a Mac, you can use the voice memo there. If you have a PC, I'm sure there's something there similar as well. And those stories that we tell about our children. Yes, and they do love them when they're little. They love them in an embarrassed kind of way on their wedding days, and all those kinds of things. But not only that, but when you have grandchildren, the stories that you can tell about their parents when their parents were the age that the grandchildren are,
Yeah.
they love those even better than storybooks at bedtime. So how do we trap those stories or keep those stories or make them more memorable? And we can do that in various ways. We can do that with some of the mementos we find in a house because there's often, like Cora was saying, those things they leave behind. It's a great way to give those mementos back to the kids so you don't end up storing everything because Cora and I both believe in tiny home living, right?
Yeah.
And so we have the space to store everybody's stuff. But a way to do that is to create memory books. And if you were so busy when your kids were little and you didn't get their baby books done, well, you can still do them now and throw in all these mementos and scrapbook, or you can write in more prose form too. And what might interest you, not being a writer, Cora?
Oh, cool. Yeah. Um, so yeah. So I guess that's part of one of the ways of leaving like a legacy is to have all those memories together. Um,
Mhm.
because
And for some people who have loved the cooking for kids, and now there's no longer that, and what do you do with that? Well, some of those recipes that were your kids' favorites, they actually make a really good book too. There's several books that have been done around food, and so you might do something like that. I think it was The Five Quarters of an Orange that I'm not remembering the author right now, but she was going through the mother's recipe books and finding all these little notes and things in places that the mother had written along with recipes. And so it was like a discovery of those recipes from our childhood memories, but it was also a discovery of a little bit about who her mother was when she found this recipe book later. It's a
yeah,
great fiction book. But we all have signature recipes and things that our kids
Mhm.
love, like the desserts and things. And these days, we tend to have more things written down. But when my mother was cooking, there was nothing written down. She would say a handful of this, a handful of that, and then she'd tell me, "Your hands are too small. Do another handful." I have recipes written out like that that I will leave for my son and my great nieces and nephews. So I'll do that. Then the other thing is, like you're saying, to take and do some of that transition time from when the kids leave to when now what, we find yourself now
Mhm.
what phase is to give yourself some time each day to write or to go through some of those photos if writing doesn't appeal to you, and create a picture memory book, or even some words with those pictures, because those pictures often mean nothing to the generations below. But with a few words of what those pictures were, they may mean a whole lot more, and that might save them from being thrown in the trash, or they might become some kind of a history project.
Yeah, because I know that's what happened with my grandma even. She had a suitcase full of photos and she knew the details for every photo, but nothing was written down. Luckily, I scammed a few of those from her that I saved for a photo board that I did. But after she passed away, the pictures have traveled on, but nobody knows who they are. So there's no
Mm.
story to go with the pictures. So it'd be nice to have that added.
That is sad. One of my students in the creative writing class, well, a few of them have done some family history, but one of them has been able to find newspaper articles for some of the family when they moved from Connecticut to Ohio to Alberta, and they found stories in local papers or history books and put these together for the grandchildren to know 3, 4, 5 generations up. So this is definitely a good research activity to do. And there's so many resources. There's the Mormon Church that has really great genealogy records.
Hmm.
There's 23andMe that you can find things out about too and connect with people. There is the Canada Census. The Canada Census, if people don't know, this is why there's the part in the Canada Census that names the generations or the parents. And then through the Canada Census, you can actually get quite a few generations back to find out, oh my goodness, I never knew that, great Uncle Charlie had a half sister over here or something. The Canada Census is a great source of historical records to do family trees.
That is cool. I didn't know that. So can anyone go on there? Get that?
Anyone can go on there. There's lots of the Canada Census information that's totally private, but the genealogy aspects, anybody can go on there and do a trace back of who was related to who. But the specific details from Canada Census are kept hidden. But that's actually quite available to find out. Okay, so this person was related to this person, and this person was related to this person, and these people lived together at this time. There are quite a few details there that you can access.
No, I didn't know that. That's the thing. You only see the stuff that you get advertised, ancestry.com or whatever, and you don't realize there's all these other resources available. That's awesome.
Yeah, there are a tremendous amount of resources. And then once you find this little thread here, you give a tug on that thread, and then you get led to this newspaper article that some of my students have found and actually were able then to get off of Mimeo, or they've kept some of these records and they've had them for a while. They've been doing their research for a while, but it's really interesting. And then some of them are actually putting together and writing, maybe not just for the kids or just for the facts, but they're actually putting together a creative faction is what I call it. They've mixed facts and mixed fiction. And so one student did a story of his great, 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 4 greats grandmother, who was part Cree, who was leading the Yellowhead, the guy that they named the Yellowhead for because he had blonde hair and he was called Yellowhead Testron. I'm horrible at French. But he found that his grandmother's 4 times up was the leader that led them through the mountains and created the Yellowhead Pass.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, so we called the book Saskatchewan. That was her name, Saskatchewan, and it's spelled in the Cree way. That's where the Saskatchewan River gets its name from, that we pronounce it that way. And he created all of these fictional details over little bits and pieces of facts that he found. He didn't find very many facts, but it was an awesome tale when he was done.
Amazing. That is so cool. So what would you say to people, though, that say they don't think they have anything people would like to hear?
Oh, I would argue that. I would argue that all day long, because the stories we have, we all have a rich life. And if we actually sit down, and so I would say to just start, if they think they don't have anything, to ask themselves some questions of what are the tears they remember? Because I tell children now, if they get a little cut or a little bruise or something, you're not going to remember that by the time you're grandma, because we do forget those. But there are tears that we remember. And behind those tears, there are definitely stories. Or what is the happiest day you remember? Or what are those days where there were things whispered behind closed doors when you were a child and you didn't know what was going on, but the energy in the house felt heavier? There's a story there.
Yeah, I think that's really common is people always think other people's stories sound more interesting than their own, when in fact everybody has something to share. And especially if it's your own family, like you say, whether it's passing it down to your kids or to grandkids, and the grandkids would love to hear any kind of stories.
Hmm. And
Yeah.
there's another point to this too, because you do emotional code work, right?
Mhm.
And so there's another point here where there's a book that says the title is It Didn't Start With You. And it is a book that explains how what happens up the generations actually travels down and can get stuck in our genetic code. This is why it's so important that we do reconciliation work, because the generations of our First Nations people now are still suffering from what was done years ago in our residential schools that was a travesty here in Alberta, in Canada. And that travels in the genetic DNA. And so the more that we can go back in history and find out what happened to the generations above, we can heal up and heal down. And I'm sure this fits with the emotional code work that
Yeah.
you do as well. It's so important to know those stories, even if we can find little bits and pieces of them. And what my sister does with a family tree is she does a genogram family tree, and she's looking for those same things that you would look for in emotional code, but you do intuitively, and you don't even need to know. And then she helps people find them. So, as one example, there was a fire when somebody's great uncle was 4 and died in the fire, but that was never talked about. And that then was present in the younger person's world and in their reality and their psyche, that they had fears of losing people. I'm not telling this story as well because there are some details that should
Yeah.
be kept private. But those things that happen up the generations are very important to who we are now and what we want to pass on to our children. We want to pass on to them as clean a slate as possible. And knowing our past is so helpful. When we don't know our past, then definitely do emotional code work with someone like yourself.
Yeah. So, how are some ways people can tell stories? Like, if there was some sort of scandalous things that happened in the past, how can they kind of recreate those with integrity and grace?
Oh, good question. Good question. So an example is that a young woman in the early 50s, late 40s, early 50s, was pregnant in small town Alberta through a date rape. She came to Edmonton. Her parents dropped her off the Y. She was going to find work. And then she wrote, and she said, I found work in San Francisco. She had a friend in San Francisco. She wrote letters to San Francisco. Her friend then postmarked them from San Francisco to her parents. And her parents never knew that she'd never left Edmonton. She had the child, gave it up for adoption. When she single-handedly changed the rules in to allow adoptees find their parents and for parents to find their children. When she found her son, it wasn't really an option to tell anyone who the father was, because small town date rape and embarrass the person who had a good name. And really, it was more, she said, a case of that neither one of them really knew what to do. So how did they tell their story? Because they wanted to write their story. He was writing his parts of his life where he felt like something was missing, and she was writing her part where when she was shelling peas in the fall, she would, pull up a chair beside and she would talk to an imaginary child, the one that she'd given up. And imagine him shelling peas with his mom somewhere on a farm in Iowa.
Yeah.
He was raised in England, by the way.
Oh,
So she always imagined him in Iowa for some reason. And I said, okay, so every small town has schools that compete with sports in other towns, and then there's sometimes a dance after the sporting games. So just change the height, the look, the hair, give the other person some kind of, if you're writing about someone that has a strong ego about how they look, then give them a wart, give them balding hair, make something that they would never really want to claim. give them a few different characteristics, but still, you can still keep the truth of the situation, but you change the details enough that no one would know. And it can be some stranger that was in that town for a rodeo, or a kid that, you know, was at that school dance that you never see again from another town. And you never have to name that town. You can just give enough details saying, you know, those school dances that we sometimes got into after, you know, our team played at, you know, some of the other schools in the county, or whatever. And so you don't have to give away the details. You can leave everybody wondering. But to name it like that happened, and if everybody did the math around that time, this person then would be outed. So you can change details, change the names. Even sometimes you can change the genders if it suits that way. And then also there's going and asking permission, because there can be healing on both sides to talk about the difficult scenarios.
Yeah, yeah. Just depends if you want to go there. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's yeah, right. Well, that's awesome. Some awesome tips for people to share some stories. And I know you offer a little something if people need some help getting started.
Sure, I love to brainstorm writing, and I can talk about writing all day long. So if people want to have a 15-minute chat with me about any ideas they have about writing, they can certainly reach me through the website. My website is just under transition right now. Today it's the old one. Sometime tonight, tomorrow, Saturday for sure, it'll be the new one, the new
Oh,
and fancy one. But my contact information is on both, and they'll be able to find me there and find me on Facebook. Uh,
great.
I'll
So
find me
everybody,
through.
yeah, if you're on Facebook, you'll see the website on below here, rustylahaye.ca. And if you want to get in touch with her, just reach out and set up an appointment, because you do have a story to tell. We all have a story inside of us. And if you enjoyed our interview today and you'd like to see more of them, you're an empty nester and you'd like to connect with other empty nesters, comment below with a yes, and I'll get the link to you for my empty nester group. We love to have more of you in there, and we've got more good topics coming up. So have a great day, everybody, and thanks, Rusty, for being on the show today.
Thank you, Cora, for having me. Bye all.
Bye.